The Adventure of the Gloria Scott. Sherlock Holmes tells Dr. Watson of one of his first cases, a case that the detective seems quite proud of. 10 years earlier, in his university days, Holmes spent a month with his friend, Victor Trevor, at Victor's father's estate in Norfolk. At the time, Victor Trevor was his only friend from campus. Holmes acknowledges he spent too much time on his work and studies, neglecting the social side of the university. While there, Holmes amazed his host, Victor's father, who was a justice of the peace and a wealthy landowner. He had made his fortune in the goldfields in Australia years earlier. At university, Holmes had already become recognized for his deductive powers, and at the dinner table at the Trevors, Holmes gave a demonstration. One of Holmes's deductions was that the senior Trevor knew of someone with the initials J.A., someone whom he was now trying to forget. This deduction, though, has unforeseeable results, for Trevor faints from the revelation. Holmes had touched a sore spot, and possibly did not believe the old man's explanation once he had come back to himself that J.A. had been an old lover. The next day, Holmes makes his excuses and leaves the Trevor estate. Holmes is aware that he is making the senior Trevor uneasy with his presence. The evening before he did this, another old man suddenly appeared at the house, causing the elder Mr. Trevor to rush for a shot of brandy before greeting him. They had apparently been shipmates some 30 years earlier, and Mr. Trevor said something about finding him some work. Soon afterwards, Holmes and his friend found Mr. Trevor drunk. Holmes then left the Trevor estate and spent the next 7 weeks at his chemistry experiments, suddenly receiving a telegram from the younger Trevor begging him to come back to Norfolk. Once he got there, Victor told Holmes that his father was dying as a result of a stroke suffered after he received a seemingly meaningless letter. They found that he had died while Victor had been meeting Holmes at the station. After Holmes had left the house 7 weeks earlier, it seems that this old man who had come looking for work, and whose name was Hudson, proved to be as unruly an employee as could be imagined. He had demanded to be promoted from gardener to butler and had got what he wanted. He had taken unforgivable liberties which would normally have resulted in an employee's dismissal. He was often drunk. Victor could not stand him and would have beaten Hudson up if he had been younger. The other staff had complained about him. However, Victor's father always let him get away with any infamy. Suddenly, Hudson announced that he was leaving because he had tired of Norfolk, and he was going to Hampshire to see Beddoes, another old shipmate. Now, Holmes's friend had become thin and careworn by the ordeal. He had thought that the trouble was over when Hudson had left, but shortly afterward came the letter, from Fordingbridge in Hampshire. It read: "The supply of game for London is going steadily up. Headkeeper Hudson, we believe, has been now told to receive all orders for flypaper and for preservation of your hen pheasant's life." It meant nothing to Victor, and it was quite a while before Holmes saw anything in it. He found the key. If one read every third word beginning with the first, there was an intelligible message: the game is up. Hudson has told all. Fly for your life. Holmes had deduced that the game was blackmail. Some guilty secret had been the power that Hudson had held over the elder Mr. Trevor. Victor Trevor, though, now fears that the whole family will be in disgrace, although it is, of course, still unclear what the reason for the blackmail was. These missing details, though, are soon discovered, for a written confession from the elder Trevor is found. The old man's dying words to his doctor unlocked the secret. Some papers were found in Mr. Trevor's Japanese cabinet. The document was a confession. The elder Mr. Trevor had once borne the name James Armitage, initials J.A., but in his younger days, he had been convicted of embezzlement from the bank where he worked and been caught. He was sentenced to transportation to Australia. Trevor explains though, that he had taken the money to settle a debt of honor, but had been discovered before he could return the money as planned. James Armitage was to be transported on board the Gloria Scott, but it proved to be a most unusual journey. Once on the ship, the Gloria Scott, bound for Australia from Falmouth, Armitage found out from a neighbouring prisoner that there was a conspiracy to take over the ship. The neighbour, Jack Prendergast, had financed the scheme out of the nearly £250,000 in unrecovered money from his crime of fraud. Many of the crew, even officers, were in his employ, and even the chaplain Wilson, who was not truly a clergyman at all. Wilson, while pretending to minister to the prisoners, was actually furnishing them with pistols and other equipment to be used when the time was right. Armitage also drew his other neighbor, Evans, into the scheme. As might be expected, all did not go as planned. The takeover was accomplished unexpectedly when the ship's doctor discovered a pistol while treating a prisoner. The prisoners then had to make their move right away or they would lose the element of surprise. In the ensuing melee, the captain and many other men were killed, and there arose a dispute between Prendergast with his supporters and a group including Armitage over what to do with the few loyal crewmen still left alive. Prendergast's side would eventually come out on top, but the fate of the surviving loyal crew was now divisive. Armitage and a small number of other prisoners, including a man named Evans, who would become Beddoes, would not stand for cold-blooded murder, and so before the event, they were set adrift in a small boat to make their way as they would. Shortly after leaving in their small boat, the Gloria Scott blew up as the result of the violence spreading to where the gunpowder was kept. The men in the small boat, among whom was also Evans, hurried back to the site and rescued only one survivor, a young seaman by the name of Hudson. Luckily for the survivors, the small boat was spotted and rescued the next day by a passing ship, the Hotspur, also bound for Australia. They passed themselves off as survivors from a passenger ship and once in Australia, headed for the goldfields. The survivors would therefore find themselves transported to Australia as freemen rather than prisoners. Armitage changed his name to Trevor, and Evans changed his name to Beddoes. Armitage and Beddoes did well in Australia and, in the goldfields, both accumulated large fortunes. Both later returned to England as rich men and had become pillars of the community. All had gone well until Hudson had suddenly shown up. Since no scandal involving the Gloria Scott ever followed the odd message from Beddoes, Evans, and since neither Hudson nor Evans was ever heard from again, the police believed Hudson had done away with Evans. Holmes, though, figures the opposite has occurred, believing that Evans had likely killed Hudson, believing that he had told all, when in fact he had not. Holmes then concluded that Evans had gathered as much money as he could and had himself left the country. Despite the lack of scandal, Victor Trevor had himself left the country, traveling to the Indian subcontinent. He was said to prosper there as a respected and successful plantation owner.